Dick Clark was always seen as America's sweetheart. He looked clean-cut, friendly, and charming, the kind of person people trusted right away. On television, he seemed wholesome and perfect, the ideal host who made everything look easy. But in 1960, something happened behind closed doors that changed the way many people viewed him. During a private meeting with powerful music executives, he made a statement so shocking that several of his co-workers immediately walked out of the room. They left the show and never returned to American Bandstand. The moment was caught on tape, then hidden away for decades. What he said revealed what he really believed about who deserved to be seen on his show and who didn't. It wasn't simply about music or entertainment anymore. It was about power, control, and the image he wanted the world to accept. That comment damaged friendships, ended careers, and changed the direction of the show forever. Anyone who heard the truth began to see his famous smile in a completely different way. Dick Clark was born on November 30, 1929, in Bronxville, New York. He grew up in Mount Vernon in a calm household where his mother stayed at home and his father worked for several radio stations. Because of his father's job, young Dick was surrounded by microphones, scripts, and the voices of announcers even before he understood the industry. From an early age, he was drawn to sound, speech, rhythm, and the idea of reaching people through a microphone. By the time he was 10 years old, he had already decided he wanted to work in radio. He didn't wait for permission. Instead, he built a small studio in his basement. He used an old stove as a pretend microphone and practiced reading his father's discarded scripts like they were real broadcasts. That little setup sparked something in him, something strong enough to carry him for the rest of his life. Once he got that first taste, he never looked back. For a while, his childhood seemed smooth. But everything changed when he turned 15. His older brother Bradley, a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot, died during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Bradley was only 22. The news didn't come from an official telegram or a military officer. Instead, neighbors arrived at the Clark home, offering condolences before the family even fully understood what had happened. That moment created a permanent wound inside Dick. Losing his brother didn't just break his heart. It hardened something inside him. From then on, his life wasn't just about following dreams. It felt like a duty to succeed, almost like he had to live enough for both himself and the brother he lost. He became the only surviving son, and every time he walked into the quiet house that once held two boys' laughter, he felt the weight of that empty space. In high school at A.B. Davis, he didn't stand out much academically, but the debate team changed him completely. That's where he found confidence. He learned how to speak clearly, how to control a room with only his voice, and how to hide nervous hands behind strong words. People started noticing his calm presence and the charm that came naturally to him. He had a clean, polite image that seemed almost too perfect, and his classmates trusted him easily. By the time he graduated in 1947, he had already worked part-time in the mailroom at WIUN in Utica, New York, a job he started at just 16. He may have been delivering mail, but he was secretly studying everything around him. He watched the announcers, memorized how the sound booths worked, and paid attention to every detail that could help him later. One day, when the station's weatherman went on vacation, Clark volunteered to fill in. He was nervous, gripping cue cards tightly, but he read the weather live on air. It wasn't glamorous, but for him, it was everything. That simple moment proved to him that he belonged behind a microphone. Throughout this time, the loss of Bradley followed him everywhere. After the funeral, his view of time changed. He no longer feared failure. He feared wasting even a single day. That fear turned into motivation. He rarely partied. He worked weekends, stayed late, and took shifts nobody wanted. Radio wasn't only a career path. It kept his mind focused, kept his emotions steady, and helped him prove he could succeed without relying on his father's position in the industry. Though his father worked at WIUN and his uncle owned the station, Dick didn't want special treatment. He even changed his on-air name to Dick Clay during his senior year in 1950 to avoid being confused with his father. He wasn't embarrassed by his family connection. He just wanted people to know he could stand on his own. After high school, he attended Syracuse University on a partial scholarship, majoring in advertising and minoring in radio. Tuition cost around $400 a year, which was difficult for the family, so he took a job at the radio station Wolf for $1 an hour. He worked weekends, played country records, and read news updates. By January 1951, he was hosting his own show called The Wolf Buckaroos. He picked the music, created smooth transitions, and practiced shaping his voice into something people enjoyed listening to. Clark also worked at WAER, the campus station, where he spent 4 years recording shows and learning skills most students didn't develop until long after graduation. The work was demanding, but he didn't see it as a burden. He loved every moment inside the sound booth. He lived for the moment the red recording light switched on. But Clark wasn't only focusing on radio. At Syracuse, he was also building confidence in front of crowds. As a member of Delta Kappa Epsilon, he organized sock hops and fraternity parties. He charged 50 cents per person at the door, picked the music himself, read the mood of the room, and kept the energy high. Every party became practice for his future. He learned when to let the music take over, when to talk, and how to guide people's emotions. These small but important lessons followed him throughout his career and helped him later dominate television. By 1951, Clark had several job offers. One was from a major advertising agency with great pay and long-term security, the kind of opportunity most parents hoped for their children. But he turned it down. He didn't want safe. He didn't want predictable. He wanted to be where his voice could reach people. His first job after college was at WKTV in Utica, hosting a country music show called Cactus Dick and the Santa Fe Riders. It was a mix of weather, skits, and performances aimed at farming communities. The pay was only $52.50 a week. When another station tried to hire him for more money, WKTV raised his salary to $75 a week to keep him. He stayed because he wanted real experience on camera. He worked on live weather segments, performed in cowboy skits, and learned how to keep his cool while the cameras rolled. Slowly, the lens no longer felt unfamiliar. Still, people whispered that he got the job only because his family worked at the station. He knew it was partly true, and that bothered him deeply. That anger pushed him harder every day. He wanted to prove he deserved every moment on screen. That determination stayed with him when he moved to Philadelphia in 1952. At only 22, he joined WFIL Radio, earning just $35 a week playing records in the afternoon. His apartment was tiny and his meals were simple, but he kept working hard. By 1954, he became the substitute host for the radio version of Bandstand, a teen dance show gaining popularity. Everything changed when the original host of the television version, Bob Horn, was arrested for drunk driving and involved in a child pornography scandal. Clark stepped in as the new host at just 26 years old. July 9, 1956, was his first day on the televised show. He looked neat and friendly, with combed hair and a steady voice. He talked to teens on the show, asked whether the music made them want to dance, and had them rate songs from 1 to 100. Something clicked immediately. The audience shot up from 5,000 to 20,000 viewers a week. Clark also introduced rules. Boys had to wear suits and girls had to wear dresses. The rules created a clean, wholesome image sponsors loved, but the dress code quietly pushed out teens from poorer families and those from different cultural backgrounds. Not everyone could afford the clothes that fit his image of perfection. Behind the scenes, another problem was growing. Clark had inherited the pay-for-play system known as payola. Record labels gave gifts under the table, watches, rare records, anything to get their songs played. By 1959, the FCC began investigating payola across the nation. Radio hosts everywhere were being accused of manipulating charts. Clark was called to testify before Congress. He admitted receiving gifts but insisted he never accepted cash. He sold his investments in music publishing, cooperated completely, and avoided charges. His public image was damaged but not destroyed. He remained one of the strongest figures in youth entertainment. Bandstand continued shaping dance trends, fashion choices, and even popular slang. He helped introduce stars like Chubby Checker and the Supremes. The show allowed teens to judge music on air, which made the audience feel involved. Clark stood at the center, calm and clean-cut, influencing an entire generation. But the dress code still cast a long shadow. It seemed harmless at first, but over time, its impact became darker. It kept some kids, especially kids of color, off the stage. Many teens who danced well and loved the music weren't given the chance to appear simply because their clothes didn't fit the show's strict standard or because their appearance didn't match the network's quiet but firm expectations. Bandstand created opportunities for some but shut others out. Everything shifted on August 5, 1957, when ABC launched American Bandstand nationally at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That moment took the local teen dance show and made it a coast-to-coast phenomenon, placing Dick Clark at the center of American pop culture. American Bandstand had something no other show had, and that was Dick Clark. He was young, clean-cut, always ready for the camera, and extremely sharp behind the scenes. By 1959, just 2 years after the show went national, it had reached 20 million viewers across the country. It became the #1 daytime program in America, and Clark was earning $10,000 a week. That kind of pay made it very clear who held the real power. Every episode was broadcast live from Philadelphia. The artists lip-synced their songs to avoid mistakes, and every choice about who got on the show was Clark's decision. If a new singer wanted a chance to succeed, they had to get his approval first. One appearance on Bandstand could turn an unknown song into a #1 hit within days. The show wasn't just dancing and music. It was also a clever way to test what teens liked. The Rate a Record segment allowed teenagers to score songs from 35 to 98. Anything above 70 was considered a possible future hit. Between 1957 and 1964, nearly 70% of America's top 40 songs had passed through this system. One of the biggest examples was Chubby Checker's song The Twist. On August 6, 1960, he performed it on Bandstand. By September, it hit #1. 2 years later, it hit #1 again. No other song had ever done that before. Clark even told Checker to tone down the dance moves to make the performance more family-friendly. Overnight, the song didn't just become a hit, it became a national dance craze. Any song played on Bandstand saw its sales jump by nearly 30%. If you got on Clark's show, your chances of becoming a star were extremely high. Clark didn't stop with one show. In 1958, he created a Saturday night program called The Dick Clark Show. It ran until 1960 and featured stars like Frankie Avalon, whose contract Clark helped arrange. Behind the scenes, Clark signed agreements with many of the performers he promoted. If the artists made money, Clark made money too. Some of these deals were intense. In some cases, he took up to 50% of the royalties. For example, Fabian Forte became famous partly because Clark put him on television, but in exchange, Clark took half of Fabian's earnings from his biggest songs. Fabian got small payments while Clark earned millions from music publishing. This wasn't a random situation. Clark built a system designed to create clean-cut, camera-friendly teen idols for advertisers, and he made sure he benefited financially from their success. But there was a darker side to this system. Black artists and more daring performers were often pushed aside while Clark's white teen idols were polished, promoted, and protected. Then came the scandal. In late 1959, the House of Representatives started investigating payola, which was the illegal practice of accepting money or gifts in exchange for airing certain songs. Clark became a main target. The numbers were too striking to ignore. He had ownership stakes in 33 music companies. One example shocked investigators. In 1957, Clark invested only $125 in Jamie Records, a small struggling label. By 1959, after Duane Eddy released several surf rock hits, that tiny investment had turned into $31,700, equal to about $246,000 today. When questioned, Clark told Congress, "I think the crime I have committed, if any, is that I made a great deal of money in a short time on little investment." He insisted he wasn't involved in bribery and was simply a clever businessman. But the fact that he played songs from labels he partially owned raised serious concerns. On May 2, 1960, Clark sat before Congress for 8 hours. He admitted to promoting music from companies he owned, like Chancellor Records, where he held a 25% stake. For example, Bobby Rydell's song Wild One had been played on Bandstand 17 times in 1959. Those numbers didn't happen by accident. They were part of a strategy. Clarke defended himself by saying he had already sold his interests in those companies before the hearings. He promised he never accepted payola in the traditional sense. Congress couldn't prove he took bribes, but the consequences came anyway. Clarke's longtime producer, Tony Mamarella, resigned after investigators discovered he received $7,000 in gifts from record labels, including a fur stole meant for Clarke's wife. ABC wanted to protect Clarke's reputation, so Mamarella took the fall. During that same week, Clarke sold nearly $150,000 worth of music assets, worth about $1 million today, to avoid legal trouble. Clarke later said his mistake was simply making money too fast. In 1960, ABC suspended Bandstand for a short time. When it returned, Clarke was still the host, but all of his music-related business interests were removed. Meanwhile, Alan Freed, a competing DJ who supported many black artists, wasn't as lucky. He was fired from his job and blacklisted from the industry. Clarke kept his spot. That outcome angered many people, especially those who felt Freed had been punished for supporting black musicians while Clarke was rewarded for promoting safer, whiter acts. Even after the scandal died down, the criticism didn't stop. In 1961, Clarke formed Dick Clarke Productions to focus on safer, less controversial projects like game shows, specials, and award programs. But behind the scenes, many people believed he was still operating the same way as before. In 1969, musician J.J. Cale refused to appear on Bandstand because he didn't want to lip-sync. Many other artists began doing the same. They felt the show valued profit and publicity more than real performances. The tension grew as more musicians began speaking out. There was another issue rarely shown on screen. Clarke claimed he integrated Bandstand in 1959 by featuring black performers like Fats Domino. But the audience told a different story. Until 1964, nearly every teenager seen on camera was white. Even though Philadelphia had a large black population, most black teens were quietly turned away at the door. A few made it inside, but they were often mistreated. One young girl named Dorothy Lynch did get into the studio, but she was mocked, pushed around, and eventually forced out by the regular white dancers. Clarke later said he didn't notice, but producers enforced strict rules behind the scenes. Only one black dancing couple was allowed per show. Black artists like Chuck Berry were allowed to perform, but their treatment was far from equal. They were often kept in the back of the stage and given less screen time. According to several sources, Clarke told record labels in 1960, "We keep it clean for the parents." Keeping it clean meant avoiding close-ups of interracial dancing and avoiding anything that might upset sponsors. Clean, in this case, meant white. When the show moved to California in the 1970s, the pattern didn't change much. Black teenagers remained rare on camera. In the 1980s, journalists exposed the truth. Dick Clarke's wholesome, all-American image had been built on a system that quietly excluded black teens and favored white performers. Sponsors didn't want controversy, so Clarke kept pushing the same safe picture. Clarke kept taking risks in his career. In 1963, he created a game show called The Object Is, where contestants traded prizes for cash. Sometimes they walked away with up to $10,000 in a single episode. The show won 2 Emmy Awards by 1964 but ended within a year. In 1965, he launched another show called Where the Action Is. It was filmed near Malibu and focused on surf rock and sunny beach culture. It featured over 37 episodes with performers like the Supremes and Paul Revere and the Raiders, chasing the teen market wherever it went. Dick Clarke's career moved in many directions, and even though not every project he tried became a huge hit, he never stopped exploring new ideas. In the beginning, his work was fun and exciting for audiences, but it wasn't always a major success. Still, Clarke kept pushing forward. He liked experimenting with television formats, business deals, and entertainment trends. In 1967, he surprised the entire industry when he used the money he had earned in television to start buying TV stations. One of the first ones he bought was KVOA in Tucson, and it became clear that he wasn't just interested in being a TV host anymore. He wanted to build something larger. Over time, he bought more media properties, and soon people in power began to notice just how much influence he was gaining. The FCC didn't like how quickly his business interests were growing. Officials launched investigations, warning him that his collection of TV stations could be seen as forming a broadcast monopoly. Clark defended himself, but the investigations made him scale back his expansion by 1970. Even though he pulled back, the damage to his public image was already done. People no longer saw him only as a cheerful TV personality. They saw him as a serious businessman, someone who understood how to build an empire and wasn't afraid to do it. In 1974, Clark took another big step when he produced the first American Music Awards. The show instantly became a major hit. Viewers loved the new format, the energy, and the celebrity appearances. But behind the scenes, rumors started circulating. Some insiders claimed the voting was manipulated and that certain winners were chosen ahead of time. Olivia Newton-John won 2 large awards that night, and people whispered that it was arranged to boost ratings. Whether the rumors were true or not, Clark's growing influence in the entertainment world made people suspicious. Networks didn't say anything publicly because the show made millions of dollars, but the questions never stopped. Clark also tried acting during the 1960s. He thought maybe he could build a career in movies too. He appeared in a film where he played a high school counselor, and although the story was light and youthful, the movie didn't do well. It made only $1.2 million even though the budget was $1.8 million, which meant it lost money. Critics weren't impressed. Clark tried again in 1963 with another movie called The Young Doctors, but that one also received weak reviews and failed to make a mark. After that, he realized acting wasn't going to become a successful path for him, so by 1965 he gave up that part of his career completely. His next big gamble came later, in 1980, when he launched a Broadway production called Beehive. It was a jukebox musical filled with popular songs from the 1960s. Audiences enjoyed the music, and the show earned more than $1 million in ticket sales. But soon, critics accused it of erasing black musicians from rock and roll history. They felt the narrative didn't acknowledge the deep and important roots of the genre. Clark faced the criticism quietly, but the controversy stuck with the show and with him. Long before Broadway and big award shows, Clark's most defining work came from reshaping how America celebrated New Year's Eve. Before he stepped in, New Year's Eve programming on TV was slow, formal, and heavily focused on ballroom music. Guy Lombardo's long-running CBS special had dominated the holiday for years. But younger generations had moved far away from that old-fashioned style. They wanted something exciting, something that matched the culture of the time. On December 31, 1972, Clark completely changed how New Year's Eve looked on television. The first ever New Year's Rocking Eve aired live from Times Square, and the vibe was totally different. It was louder, younger, and full of energy. Three Dog Night performed from the Queen Mary in Long Beach, and Clark hosted from New York, smiling through the freezing weather. Around 25 million people tuned in, and the electricity of Times Square filled living rooms across the country. Clark didn't just host a show. He reinvented the holiday. Instead of formal clothes, orchestras, and polite applause, people now celebrated with rock music, flashing lights, confetti, and countdown excitement. 2 years later, in 1974, the show moved to ABC and officially took on his name. It became known as Dick Clark's New Year's Rocking Eve. The 1975 edition featured the Beach Boys as the headliners, which gave the broadcast even more cultural power. But that particular night quickly turned chaotic. Without warning, about 30 nude protesters belonging to an art group called the American Family stormed the area near the stage. They shouted messages about freedom and peace while running through the crowd. Clark could barely see what was going on because of the lights and confusion, but the live cameras caught the entire event. Police rushed in and dragged the protesters away while the show continued. Clark stayed calm. He didn't panic or freeze. He simply kept talking and kept the energy moving. The incident became a legendary moment that reminded everyone that Times Square was unpredictable and wild, and live TV meant anything could happen. As the years went on, The show became stronger, more polished, and more beloved. By the time the 1980s arrived, New Year's Rocking Eve had become a tradition. Every year featured new stars performing their biggest hits. In 1980, Donna Summer's song Hot Stuff became the signature track of the celebration. Her music blasted through the speakers as confetti covered the crowd. Families at home, young adults, and even older viewers tuned in, because Clark made the night feel magical. The show's format stayed simple: start around 10 p.m., bring out famous performers, keep the energy high, and deliver the midnight countdown in a way only Clark could. But even the most organized productions can face unexpected disasters. In 1981, during the balloon drop at midnight, something went terribly wrong. The net holding thousands of balloons didn't open correctly. Instead of floating into the air, the balloons collapsed downward and fell onto the crew. Clark himself was caught underneath them. The cameras didn't cut away, so the entire country saw it happen live. Instead of getting embarrassed or upset, Clark laughed and joked that he had been trapped in youth itself. His reaction turned what could have been a disaster into one of the most iconic bloopers in live television history. As the show grew bigger, so did Clark's empire. By the 1990s, New Year's Rocking Eve had become more than a broadcast. It was a major business enterprise earning nearly $50 million a year. Advertisers paid huge amounts to be associated with the event because it reached millions of people. Dick Clark Productions controlled everything, which meant Clark personally benefited from every ad, every performer, and every minute on air. He kept expanding the format, adding international segments, inviting globally known artists, and pushing for more elaborate staging. The production became brighter, louder, and more visually spectacular each year. It no longer relied on tradition because it had become a tradition itself. When 1999 arrived, the entire world felt the excitement of entering a new millennium. ABC created a massive special called 2000 Today, with Peter Jennings as the main anchor. But the network didn't leave Clark behind. They sent him straight into the heart of Times Square. He stood among the crowds, bundled tightly in winter gear, reporting live with the excitement that people had grown to expect from him. Some viewers noticed that his speech seemed slower that year. Rumors had already started spreading about his health, but he didn't talk about it publicly. His smile, however, never faded. He joked with people in the crowd, did interviews, and stayed on air throughout the night. He knew the world was watching, and he wanted to be part of that historic moment. Behind the scenes, Clark had been dealing with serious health issues for years. Since 1994, he had been living with type 2 diabetes, although he kept it private until more than 10 years later. When he finally spoke publicly about his condition, he wanted to help raise awareness. He discussed how diabetes caused problems such as blood sugar crashes, heart risks, and trouble with circulation. He exercised every day, ate carefully, and followed strict routines to manage his condition. He also warned people that 2/3 of individuals with diabetes die from heart attacks or strokes. Even though his voice had become softer and his energy less intense than before, he kept working and kept pushing himself. Everything changed in December 2004. Just weeks before the next New Year's Eve show, Clark suffered a massive stroke on December 6. The stroke left him partially paralyzed and made it extremely difficult for him to speak. For the first time ever, he couldn't host his own show. Regis Philbin stepped in to take his place that year. Many people thought Clark's television career was over. But he refused to accept that. A year later, in 2005, he returned to the broadcast. His speech was slow, his movements were limited, and he looked very different from the energetic figure people remembered. But he appeared live because he wanted the world to know he wasn't giving up. He told viewers that his speech wasn't perfect but that he was improving. Behind the scenes, he had relearned how to walk, how to form words, and how to time his conversations. From 2005 through 2011, he continued to appear each year alongside Ryan Seacrest, gradually passing on the role while still remaining part of the tradition he created. Even while battling health challenges, Clark stayed heavily involved in his production company. By the year 2000, Dick Clark Productions had created more than 7,500 hours of television. Clark reviewed every script, approved every segment, and made sure everything met his standards. He avoided anything controversial, preferring clean, polished content. Some employees felt he controlled things too tightly, but they also admitted that his strict approach worked. His shows were reliable, professional, and consistently popular. His reputation for delivering high-quality live events made his brand one of the strongest in the industry. However, not everything he attempted became successful. His career had high moments, risky experiments, business battles, health struggles, and moments of enormous triumph. But through it all, one thing stayed constant. Dick Clark never stopped moving forward. He adapted to new trends, shaped entire traditions, and became an iconic part of American life. Even when the world changed around him, and even when his health changed the way he spoke or moved, he refused to step away from the spotlight completely. His dedication, resilience, and love for entertainment kept him going, and his work continues to influence television and live events long after his toughest moments. In 1990, Dick Clark tried bringing back a show called Your Hit Parade, hoping nostalgia would help it become popular again. The show focused on musical countdowns, just like the original version years earlier. But the timing was wrong. Grunge music was becoming huge, and younger audiences were drawn to raw, emotional rock instead of polished pop performances. The show looked too clean and old-fashioned compared to what people wanted. Viewership dropped quickly. Advertisers didn't want to invest money in something that wasn't attracting attention. After only one season, the show quietly disappeared. There was no big announcement, no farewell episode. It simply ended because people had moved on. A similar situation happened in 2001 when Clark co-hosted a talk show with Danny Bonaduce. It was designed to be a male version of The View, with conversations, interviews, and discussions that covered many topics. Producers imagined it would appeal to audiences who wanted a different kind of daytime talk show. But the show struggled from the start. It never developed a strong identity or clear purpose. Conversations felt forced, the chemistry never clicked, and viewers didn't connect with it. Even when it received Emmy nominations, the recognition wasn't enough to save it. After about 18 months, the show ended. Clark's presence and reputation weren't enough to rescue a format that didn't resonate with audiences. Clark also entered the home video market in the 1980s, a time when VHS tapes were becoming extremely popular. In 1985, he launched Dick Clark Video, a company that distributed old American Bandstand footage through Vestron. People loved the nostalgia, and the tapes sold well. But soon, problems appeared. Several former bandstand dancers filed lawsuits, saying their faces and performances were used without their permission. Many of them had never signed agreements allowing their images to be packaged and sold. Their complaints brought attention to the complicated world of entertainment rights, especially during the VHS boom. Behind the cheerful memories of the show were real people who felt they had been taken advantage of. Their legal battles reminded everyone that marketing nostalgia could sometimes come at the cost of fairness and respect for the individuals who helped create those memories. Clark's stroke in December 2004 changed everything. The entertainment world was shocked when news spread that he was partially paralyzed and struggling with speech. It also pushed forward the slow transition of leadership within his company. For years, Clark had remained heavily involved in Dick Clark Productions, but after the stroke, he had to let others handle more responsibilities. By the time he passed away in 2012, he had already stepped back from most day-to-day decisions. Clark died on April 18, 2012, at St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica. He was 82 years old. He had checked into the hospital for a routine outpatient procedure, but the next day he suffered a massive heart attack. His wife and children were by his side when he passed. His death certificate listed diabetes, heart disease, and complications from his earlier stroke. What made the news even more emotional for fans was that he had been on television not long before his death, still appearing on New Year's Eve broadcasts, still fighting to stay connected to the audience he loved. When his estate was finalized, it was valued at around $100 million. A few months later, Dick Clark Productions was sold to a group that included Guggenheim Partners. The sale price was reported to be between $370 million and $385 million. The entertainment industry was stunned. That number showed how valuable Clark's brand had become. It wasn't just a company. It was a symbol of decades of live shows, award ceremonies, and unforgettable television moments. But big sales often attract big scrutiny. After the company changed hands, former employees and performers began filing lawsuits. Some accused the company of withholding residual payments they were owed. Others said they had not been paid fairly for their work on past productions. Stagehands filed class action claims that totaled around $400,000. Behind the bright lights and the polished broadcasts were people who felt they had been mistreated or overlooked. These lawsuits painted a more complicated picture of Clark's empire, showing that not everything ran as smoothly behind the scenes as it appeared on air. The questions didn't stop at payments. People also debated Clark's legacy, especially regarding the early part of his career. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, he became caught up in the payola scandals. Many radio and TV personalities were accused of accepting money or gifts in exchange for promoting certain songs. Clark had to testify before Congress. Unlike others, such as Alan Freed, he survived the scandal largely intact. But he did so by selling off several music-related business interests to separate himself from conflicts of interest. His public image remained clean, but the investigations showed how deeply he had been involved in the industry's business side. Years later, critics revisited Clark's early work and pointed out problems. Some argued that American Bandstand benefited from a system that excluded many black artists or limited their opportunities. They said the show often focused on white performers and didn't fully represent the true roots of rock and roll. Several musicians and dancers later admitted they felt used or pushed aside, saying the show seemed more interested in promoting Clark's brand than supporting their careers. Old interviews and rare footage revealed comments from people who felt they deserved better recognition. These criticisms added complexity to Clark's legacy. They didn't erase his accomplishments, but they reminded everyone that the entertainment world during those decades was shaped by inequalities that still echo today. In the end, Clark's story was filled with success, but also with complications. His friendly smile made viewers feel relaxed. His voice became a symbol of celebration. His countdown on New Year's Eve felt like a tradition that would last forever. People trusted him, admired him, and welcomed him into their homes year after year. But underneath the excitement and sparkle, there were business deals, legal battles, controversies, and tough decisions. Clark was talented, ambitious, and deeply driven. He understood the industry better than almost anyone else in his era. He knew how to build a brand, how to keep his shows running smoothly, and how to make himself the face of entertainment. Every December 31st, when the ball dropped and millions of people watched the confetti fall in Times Square, they heard his familiar voice leading the countdown. Even as time passed and the world changed, his style stayed the same, steady, warm, and almost timeless. He became part of the holiday itself, a reminder of old years ending and new ones beginning. His legacy remains powerful and complicated, shaped by decades of work that transformed television, music, and live events. Behind the charm was a man who always knew how to stay in the center of American culture, no matter how much the world shifted around him.